Hong Kong is in serious trouble. While a deadly pandemic spreads, authorities are cracking down hard on protesters, and Hong Kong is becoming a police state. Welcome back to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. Ever since the British gave the city of Hong Kong to China in 1997, the Chinese Communist Party has been trying to subvert the freedoms of Hong Kong to make it just another Chinese city. But all along, the people of Hong Kong have resisted. Last year saw massive protests, with people specifically targeting the Chinese Communist Party. But this year, the coronavirus pandemic hit, and everything changed. Joining me today to talk about the current situation in Hong Kong is a former member of the Hong Kong Legislative Council, Alan Leong. He's also the sitting chairman of the Civic Party. Thanks for joining me today.
My pleasure.
So last year, the international media was focused on Hong Kong protests. But with the coronavirus, that focus has shifted. What's changed in Hong Kong since the pandemic?
Public protests have, in a way, reduced in number because of the pandemic and people's concern about its spreading amongst people participating in protests, I suppose. But in the past 2 weekends, people started coming out again to sing "Glory to Hong Kong" and to chant slogans at various different shopping arcades and shopping centers, only to be treated by riot police, not this time round accusing us of riots, but of offending what is known to be prohibition against public gathering of 4 people or more. So it is interesting that they are using this public health special regulation to stop people from exercising our right to sing our song in shopping arcades.
So it's the same tactics, just a different excuse.
Yeah, I think you put it rightly.
Do you think the lack of media focus makes the Chinese Communist Party feel like it can get away with something in Hong Kong?
I think this timing has been picked for exactly the same reason that you suggested. When the world has been fighting the coronavirus pandemic, I think the Chinese Communist Party thinks that they will have no time to spare to follow what is happening on the ground in Hong Kong. And that is exactly why I would suggest that the world, particularly America and other liberal democracies, should not forget about the Hong Kong freedom movement, because what you are seeing on the ground happening in Hong Kong could well happen to you if you do nothing to avert the cause.
There are some pretty big protests coming up in Hong Kong. The June 4th Tiananmen Square massacre anniversary, and also the anniversary of the British handover of Hong Kong. Do you think, how do you think those protest events are going to go with the current coronavirus pandemic situation and with the Chinese Communist Party trying to crack down more on protests?
Well, the chief executive has already indicated that this is not a suitable time to talk about uplifting those plans for social gathering. So I suppose that means our chief executive and administration would still insist on social distancing and use that as an excuse to not granting permission for Hong Kong people to come out in big numbers to commemorate the June 4th in the usual form of the candlelight vigil to take place in Victoria Park. In fact, anniversaries, first anniversaries of very significant events in the anti-extradition movement and in the freedom movement will be coming up very soon. You will recall that the Hong Kong government planned to have the extradition bill sending Hong Kong people back to the mainland for trial passed in our legislature on the 12th of June last year. So come the 12th of June this year, we would be commemorating the first anniversary of a series of very significant events.
So I imagine they're going to try and prevent these protests with the excuse of public health. It's very convenient.
I think so. So they are using the coronavirus pandemic to serve their political agenda.
So it seems like the Chinese Communist Party is working really hard to turn Hong Kong into one country, one system. They've gone after pro-democracy legislators. They have, in one day in April, they arrested 15 pro-democracy activists. Are you concerned at all about your own future?
Well, of course we are very concerned, but we are not in despair. Not only that 15 of our seasoned political figures in the Democratic camp were arrested in high profile on the 18th of April. We also had the Central People's Government Liaison Office in Hong Kong redefining Article 22 of the Basic Law, which is, I see, to be the most crucial article, which provides for the Central People's Government and all its departments not to interfere with matters within Hong Kong's autonomy. But the liaison office director actually said, oh, no, that had been a misunderstanding on the part of Hong Kong for the past 23 years. We, the liaison office in Hong Kong, were not a Central People's Government's department in Hong Kong. We actually are the Central People's Government in Hong Kong, and we can exercise supervisory powers over every aspect of Hong Kong, including how legislators should conduct themselves in the Legislative Council, and also what shops we should patronize. There is a movement in Hong Kong running parallel to the freedom movement, which is what has been known as the Yellow Economic Ring movement, meaning that all of us who supports democracy, freedom, rule of law, human rights, would patronize those shops that share the same ideologies and support the same values. And the liaison office went out of its way to say, oh, this does not sit well with a free market economy, and you are actually using politics to hijack economic activities. So this is very worrying if the Central People's Government, the Chinese Communist Party, they are putting their finger in every pie in Hong Kong. And where is the autonomy promised us, which is supposed to last until 2047?
Well, leave it to a communist official to explain the principles of the free market. What were the reactions to what the liaison office was saying?
Well, Hong Kong Democrats, of course, reacted quite violently to this latest interpretation of Article 22 by the liaison office and also by the Central People's Government's Hong Kong Macau office. We actually said in so many words that if such a supervisory power as claimed by the CCP and the Central People's Government did exist, that would mean scrapping the one country, two systems constitutional order altogether.
Well, at the end of the day, if that's what the Chinese Communist Party wants, what really can the people of Hong Kong do to stop it?
Well, if that is exactly what the Chinese Communist Party wants, then I'm afraid what Hong Kong people can do is to stand and fight until the last man standing, that we want to hold the CCP to its promises. Now, I think it is here that perhaps the international community, particularly the liberal democracies of the world, can come in. Hong Kong is the only place flying the five-star red flag throughout the entire country that has a history dealing with liberal democracies for the past century or so. Hong Kong is also the only international financial center of the country. Hong Kong shares with liberal democracies same core values like freedom, human rights, rule of law, separation of powers, and a civil service that is apolitical, etc. If liberal democracies are not forgetting about what they want to achieve by supporting China's ascension to WTO about 20 years ago in 2001, then Hong Kong is probably their only possible foothold in the entire country, that you can continue with that original idea of winning China over as a member of a world citizen, right, that shares the same value as liberal democracies. And you must know that the National People's Congress and also the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference will soon hold their annual meeting in Beijing. Now, let us see what comes out of these two meetings. You must have heard from your Secretary of State, Mr. Pompeo, that he wanted to delay the making of a report required of him under the recently passed Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act. And he gave as the main reason for delaying the making of that report to be exactly waiting for the NPC and the CPPCC to have concluded their annual meetings, so that he can then tell whether the CCP is doing anything that would worsen the situation on the ground in Hong Kong. In fact, to Americans and to liberal democracies of the world, they have only one of two options. Option one is to maintain a foothold in Hong Kong, hoping that by continuing to deal with China under the auspices of WTO, the World Trade Organization, they can still win over China to one day adopt a rules-based game. The second option is, of course, for them to pull out of Hong Kong completely. So Hong Kong will no longer be a trusted world international financial center. Now, I think this latter cause of pulling out, uprooting completely from Hong Kong, will not only harm Hong Kong and China, it will also harm yourselves. So this is probably the last option that Hong Kong, China, CCP, and Western liberal democracies would want to see. But whether this is really a viable option, when you see some hope in opting for such a way to deal with Hong Kong, it all depends on how much hope and goodwill that the CCP is prepared to express in these two annual conferences that are due to take place in about 10 days' time.
Well, you mentioned the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act. Part of that bill mandates an annual review process to assess whether Hong Kong is still truly autonomous from mainland China. If it's not, the U.S. will treat Hong Kong economically just like the rest of mainland China, which would include trade tariffs. Now, Hong Kong already is facing a really serious recession because of the coronavirus lockdown. If the U.S. were to treat Hong Kong just like the rest of mainland China, wouldn't that just hurt Hong Kong?
Well, Hong Kong would definitely be hurt, and in fact will be hit very hard. But not only Hong Kong will be hit. I think mainland China, who has been depending on Hong Kong as a place to attract foreign direct investments into the country, and also to a place to exchange renminbi for internationally traded currencies, will also be hit. But at the same time, I think the US and European countries who decide to uproot themselves from Hong Kong will also be hit. The fact is that China and Hong Kong are already very much part and parcel of the world economic setup. And for Hong Kong, I think American and European interests are really very deep-rooted in Hong Kong. It cannot be uprooted without you feeling the pain overnight. So I think let us hope for the best, that there will be some reason for you to be hopeful that the process that you started 20 years ago in supporting China's ascension to WTO will have a chance to continue to be pursued with fruitful results. And that will give you a reason to maintain your foothold in Hong Kong, and Hong Kong can remain a international financial center, serving not only ourselves, but also the interests of liberal democracies and China at the same time.
You were also the vice chairman of the Independent Police Complaints Council. How well do you think the Hong Kong police force is accepting criticism these days?
Well, I acted in such a capacity a long time ago. But in fact, the brutality shown by Hong Kong police in the past 7 months, especially the past 7 months, is totally unacceptable. Hong Kong has really become a police state of sort. Um, the police can actually abuse their powers without consequences and being actually protected by the law enforcement authorities. Now, this is something that I feel particularly upset and sad about. Um, we have called for the appointment by the Hong Kong government of a independent commission of inquiry to look into police brutality and police behavior from June last year onwards. And you know, this is one of the 5 demands that we have been asking for. And so far, this demand has fallen on deaf ears, and with our chief executive declaring that she did not have many friends, and the 30,000 police men and women were her only friends. So that would be actually suggesting that anything goes with police behavior and their brutality committed on our young protesters. And that is something that I feel particularly sad about.
Well, speaking of Hong Kong becoming essentially a police state, one thing the liaison office has pushed recently is a national security law, Article 23, which would essentially make criticism of the Chinese Communist Party illegal in Hong Kong. Why do you think they keep pushing this when Hong Kongers have reacted really negatively against Article 23 for years now?
Well, you must know that in 2003, the 1st of July, 500,000 people took to the streets of Hong Kong in the most peaceful manner to protest against the making of the Article 23 national security laws. Because we always thought, and we still think, that by making such a law and requiring us to sacrifice our human rights and freedoms, Hong Kong will no longer have the rule of law as we know of the institution before the reversion of sovereignty. And it is really unbelievable that the CCP would want to have another go at making such a law when compared to 20 years ago, the trust level of Hong Kong people in the CCP, in the Central People's Government, and in the Hong Kong government have become so low that I really do not think that any chief executive will be able to live through an attempt to push through such a bill in our legislature. But CCP is doing it nonetheless, probably is just a show of their determination to review or to really tell Hong Kong people, and also maybe the world as well, what is President Xi Jinping's bottom line. But talking about it is one thing. Whether the CCP will actually do so is quite another. And that is exactly why I was telling your audience at the beginning of this interview that don't move your eyes away from Hong Kong. Hong Kong can provide you with illustrations, and our experience in dealing with the CCP for the past 20 or 30 years could be something that you can find inspirations on how to deal with the CCP in time to come. In short, if I may leave you with this thought, that if you do not learn from the Hong Kong experience in dealing with the CCP, then today's Hong Kong can easily be your tomorrow. So I hope that Hong Kong people is not simply fighting our freedom movement and our freedom, our rule of law, our human rights on our own. I hope liberal democracies of the world will also stand with Hong Kong in this freedom movement and the fight to sustain the core values and institutions that we share with America and liberal democracies.
Well, it sounds like there's a lot Americans can learn from Hong Kong. Thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure.
And thank you for watching. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.